All right, hey everyone, welcome to the Church on the Way podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about our current series called What Would Jesus Do? And we have our very own senior pastor, Pastor Tim Clark, with us today.
Hey.
Hey, Pastor.
Don't know if I'm the very own, but...
I mean, our very own,
yeah,
yes.
right.
Did I say the or our?
I don't know, but either way.
Our very own Pastor Tim.
Man.
We're talking about kind of reviewing some of the things you're talking about in this series.
Yeah.
On Sunday, we launched this new series called What Would Jesus Do?
Right.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, it's what a fun series, right? I'm excited about that. What would Jesus do? All about the stuff that Jesus, it's a question, right? It's a question that has been asked for a long time. And so I don't know if you remember the 90s. Do you remember the 90s? Like
I do.
Okay, I don't know.
I look young, but I remember
you're younger
the
than
90s.
me. So we had these bracelets. What would Jesus, WWJD, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
And so the question, you're supposed to ask that question every time you have a problem or there's a challenge or something comes up. And it's really we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's really an old question. But the series is just taking a few really relevant, hot button, challenging issues of our day right now and asking the question, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. How was that question born?
Okay.
I know for me, I do remember in the 90s it was a thing.
Yeah.
It was like
Everybody
everybody in church was using it.
Right.
But where did it come from?
Okay, so in the 90s, everybody was using it not only in the church, but in culture, right?
Yeah.
People were mocking it. Like I said, what would Scooby do?
Yeah.
But all the way back in 1896, a guy named Charles Sheldon wrote a book called In His Steps. And it was just a novel. He's a pastor, and he wrote a novel about a church and a pastor who started asking this question for various reasons. Well, the real reason was there was a homeless guy that watched the church be the church, singing songs about Jesus and compassion, but they didn't ever pay attention to him. There was no compassion.
Yeah.
So this guy ends up going into the church and in the middle of a service and addressing the church, and then he actually dies in the novel. He dies in the church, and the church is really distraught and thinking, what do we need to do about this? And so the pastor challenged them, hey, let's become more like Jesus.
Yeah.
It became an international bestseller, but it's really cool why. The publisher forgot to secure the copyright for the book.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a problem because in the time, publishers and printers were looking for free or cheap information, material. And all of these publishers and printers around the world found this free novel that they weren't Christian. They just decided to publish this novel, and then they'd sell it cheaper than every other novel.
Mm-hmm.
So it became the bestseller of the time, and it's still one of the 100 best-selling novels of all time because there was a mess up on the publisher's side.
So that gives a meaning to God will take what the enemy meant for evil.
Exactly. Because I can imagine that Pastor Sheldon is like, what? He's not getting the rights or anything. But the message he wanted to communicate,
The message got out.
ended up becoming way bigger than it ever would have been otherwise.
That's awesome.
I know. I love
That's
that
awesome.
story.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So, okay, so we launched the series this past weekend. You talked about, so before talking about what Jesus would do,
Right.
you talked about what Jesus did.
Yeah, and that's super important. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about how Jesus dealt with people who didn't share his sexual ethic or God's sexual ethic. We're going to talk about how Jesus talked about materialism and generosity and what he did about it. And we're going to talk about politics.
Yeah.
Well, and on our voice, what we say. But before any of that, we have to ask the question, what did Jesus do in order to know what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
There's no way to know what would Jesus do in our time, in our place, if he were here right now in our seat, which is a great question. That comes from John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way. I love the question, but there's really no way to answer that question unless we know what did Jesus do.
Yeah.
And there's some reasons for that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. You talked on Sunday, you talked about, I think, three of the problems we run into.
Yeah.
Tell us about the first one.
Yeah. The first one is if we just ask what would Jesus do without knowing what he did do, then we could possibly shift into this moralistic thinking, salvation by works.
Yeah.
Man, if I can just do what Jesus would do in my situation, then maybe God will accept me more.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I can kind of earn my way to salvation.
Yeah.
And the question is never, can you be more like Jesus so that God can think you're great?
Sure.
It's, hey, God already loves you and he extended salvation to you. And now that he puts his spirit in your heart and transforms you, now he's going to start conforming you into the image of Christ.
Yeah.
And so it's not that we shouldn't ask the question, but we need to ask it in the right order.
Yeah.
It's what would Jesus do, or what did Jesus do, or how can I be more like Jesus now that Jesus has transformed me? How do I grow into that? Not what would Jesus do so that I can somehow, be good enough for God.
Yeah, I think when I heard you talk about that on Sunday, I immediately thought about we want to do things to make God happy.
Right.
Right. And we think if I do these things,
Right.
he'll be happy.
Yeah.
If I stop doing these things,
He's going to be mad.
he's going to be mad. If I do them, he'll be mad.
Yeah.
If I don't do them, then he'll be happy.
Right.
And so we're always trying to sort of make God or please God out of something we are doing.
Yes.
Right. And so, I guess I can connect the two. I used to have an addiction to Coca-Cola.
Okay. Wow, man. I'm glad you admitted that in front of the whole world. That's pretty heavy, man.
I wouldn't say it, but now I recognize it used to be an addiction because I couldn't stop drinking it.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola, okay?
Yeah.
And so, I think now I connect it to sometimes, there's when I got through my first week without drinking Coke, I was like, well, I went through a week. I deserve one.
Right.
And then I went, 2 weeks and 3 weeks. Now it's been months, and I'm like, I don't crave it anymore.
Right.
But we go into that in our lives, right? It's like, I've stopped doing that. God's been happy with me, but I haven't done it in such a long time. So I think I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah.
Or and we're always trying to see how much we can stretch. Or push the limits, right? And because we live our lives based on what we can do, not on what God's already
what he's done and the power he gives us, right? Galatians 5, I just read this today in our pause plan. It talks about the fact that you can't please God by the acts of the flesh. It's like you can't, become Christian because you follow the law.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Yeah.
But once you become a Christian, you've been set free so that you can please God with your actions.
Right.
And the order is really important. I think that sometimes people who, they don't get transformed in their hearts, they just go, well, I'm just going to be more like Jesus because he was a good guy. And if I'm like Jesus, then I'm going to be a good guy too.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't work because we're all sinful and broken inside. So we've got to give our lives to the Lord and then let him transform us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you've seen, maybe in your life, or you've seen with people, maybe the people that you've pastored, because you've been pastoring for many, many years now.
Long time.
What are some of the things maybe you've seen people try to do and they just kind of hit the wall?
Yeah.
And not, they're trying to be moral and they're trying to do the good thing.
Yep.
And bottom line is, salvation or the gospel is not morality or immorality.
No.
It's way more than that,
right. Yeah.
What have you seen maybe in some of the people you've gotten to shepherd, or maybe in your life?
Yeah, no, I've seen everything from, not just addiction to Coca-Cola, but addiction to Coke, right?
Yeah.
Addiction to pornography, or, a sex addiction. I've seen people that can't stop lying, and they just always are trying to make themselves look good.
Yeah.
I've seen people that are greedy. I've seen people that are envious, you know, and all of those things that are listed in Galatians 5, that people, if you just try hard enough, you think, I'm just going to overcome this. And the reality is, you're never going to overcome sin by trying hard enough, by just trying to be moral, a good person. That's a burden nobody can shoulder. And so the Spirit of God comes in and starts bringing freedom to us. And sometimes that freedom is instant, miraculous, and sometimes that freedom takes a lot of work. And you're working toward walking into freedom, and the Lord gives you accountability people in your life, and you're able to work a process and let the Holy Spirit work through you, and it takes years and years. But people do walk into freedom. And so, but again, I think it's important that we start with the Spirit who leads us into freedom rather than trying to become free ourselves. Because frankly, we're all locked in a prison and we don't have the key to get out. Jesus does.
I heard, that's so good. I heard the late Tim Keller say once that we fight so much to not do certain things. Like, well, now I'm a Christian, so I won't do that because that's bad. And so he said, we've got to internalize the gospel. And he says, you say, I'm not going to do that, not because it's bad, but because I'm a son.
Yeah.
Or I'm a daughter of
Yep.
the Lord now, right? I'm a son of the Lord now. For women, I'm a daughter.
Yeah.
And so it's like, now it's not, I'm not going to do it because it's bad. I'm not doing it because I'm adopted now. I belong to the Lord, and I can't say
Yep.
no to that. Not because it's bad, although it is bad,
Right.
but because I'm a son. I have a new identity.
Yeah. And you do it based on your identity,
Yeah.
not based on like, oh, I've got to do this somehow to please God.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's so good, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first one.
Those are some second one.
The second one was just frankly, we don't know what Jesus would do. Like, he surprised people all the time.
Yeah.
The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law all thought they knew exactly what the Messiah was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he totally shocked them. Everything he did was against what they imagined and assumed
Right.
that Jesus would do. He offended people with what he did. And
All
I
the
think
time.
that if he was here today, we would be shocked at what he might do or what he might say or how he might respond to a situation. And we might go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like a good church way to respond.
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know what he would do if he were us in our situation, in our time,
Mm-hmm.
in our place.
Because we don't know what he would do, I do have a question for
Yeah.
you. What do you think he would do in this in this day and age in
Yeah.
our culture, with something as common as social media?
Yeah.
How how do you think he would use social media?
Oh, man.
Would he start arguments or try to prove his point?
Oh man, that's such a hard question,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I use social media way too much. And
Yeah.
it's that kind of binge. I go on. I'm on it all the time. I'm not going to use it anymore, and then I get back on it. I think though that even though we don't know exactly what he would do, again, if we go back to what he did do. When he started an argument, it was with somebody that was usually religiously
Sure.
buttoned down, somebody that thought they knew everything, but it was face to face.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's just me, right? I can't imagine Jesus getting into an argument in a disembodied way, in a way that's like, I'm going to just throw bombs at this person, but not
I'll
have
walk away.
relationship.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of the incarnation was, because, right? God could have just thrown bombs from heaven.
Sure.
And been like, hey, I want you guys to get with it. And so I'm going to, send the first century equivalent of tweets,
Yeah.
to Earth. He actually incarnated himself so that he could be face to face with the people that he needed to talk to.
That's good.
And so I don't know that social media allows for the kind of incarnational life that Jesus expressed when he was on
Good.
Earth.
Yeah. So if you're watching this podcast on social media, obviously, and you have a habit of not going to church on Sunday and you're around here, if you're somewhere else, you can't come to our building. Awesome. But if you can't come to the building, come to the building. We want to see you here too.
This is a total aside from the sermon, but I'm a big believer in face to face embodied like presence, ministry of presence. And so even people that are watching, this podcast, or maybe you watch sermons all the time, and that's great. We're glad you do, and we're glad we can encourage you and challenge you and resource you. But I always would encourage, if you're somewhere that isn't in LA and you can't get to the church on the way, or even if you're in LA and the church on the way just isn't your church, find a place that you can plug into community, because community is part of church. It's not, you can't do church online alone.
Yeah.
It's a great supplement, but it's not church.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah.
Cool. So problem number one was we run into moralism versus, what was it?
Versus salvation.
Salvation.
I mean, really,
moralism, salvation.
Yeah.
Number two was
we don't know what Jesus would do. We can
don't
guess,
know.
but we don't know. Number three is, it's kind of related to number two. When we start guessing what Jesus would do, we always guess he would do what we would do. So we start,
true.
like, I think, well, Mario's messed up because, you're doing A, B, and C, but Jesus would do what I'm doing.
Right.
Or when I'm in an argument, I always think I'm right? And that's why else would we argue?
Sure.
We think that Jesus would be okay with what we're doing and wouldn't be okay with what everybody else is doing. And so we start making Jesus into an idol instead of Jesus for who he is, separate, altogether worthy, holy, transcendent. Yes, he's our friend, but not the kind of friend that just says, I'm good with whatever you want to do, which, by the way, isn't a great friend anyway. But I think that we think Jesus would, we start making Jesus in our image.
Yeah. I think our ideologies and culture and all of that inform the way we see things. And so we do shape Jesus into our own image. And we don't like it when Jesus challenges us or when Jesus offends the way we think.
Yeah.
And so, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. I mean, people come to church and, they'll hear something that offends them or challenges them. They're like, I don't want to go to that church anymore.
Yeah.
And I get it. You don't want to be at a place where people are toxic and intentionally offensive like that. But if you're not regularly challenged by reading the word or by going to church, then you're probably missing something.
Yeah.
Because we're human beings that are broken, and a perfect God is going to challenge us to his standard.
And there's never the perfect church.
No.
I've known several people that are like, well, I don't go to church because, they're hypocrites.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you go everywhere else, and there's hypocrites everywhere else. At least at church, we're trying to change.
Well, and I love this statement. If you ever find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll mess it up.
You'll ruin it.
Yeah, you'll ruin it.
That's so true.
So what did Jesus do, or what would Jesus do, has to be based on what did Jesus do.
Yeah.
And then what did Jesus do has to be based on the word.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, then that last one is we start making up, well, did it really happen that way? Are the Gospels true? And how would Jesus respond right now? And then we start inputting our own ideas into it. And I love that God has revealed his word to us in written form, that it's solid, that it's stable, that it's not changing, that nobody can go, I've got a different opinion. It's right there, right?
Yeah.
So we have to go back, and now we may interpret things differently or not always understand what the Bible's getting at, but at least we have a solid foundation that we can say, this is what Jesus did. Right. And so therefore we can know this is who Jesus is now because he doesn't change.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
So we started the series this weekend. It's going to continue for the next few weeks. If you if you are near our location, come and see us here. We want to see you. We want to meet you. And share this podcast.
Yeah.
Pastor Tim, we'll see you on the next one.
Hey, thanks, man.
All right.